this is something these people really want, and it's something that I can do, and it gives me so much pleasure. And it's something I wish I always had.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook, presented by Details Interactive, Belardi Wong, and Element. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 103, and my guest today is Grace Fooden Correy. Grace is a longtime industry friend from our days at Warnaco. She's been a fashion designer and merchandiser with many well-known brands, and then she caught the entrepreneurial bug and started a skincare business called BioFile. She's also very active in helping to mentor women in the African American community. She's had an interesting career and upbringing, so I hope you'll enjoy the show. Before we get started, a quick thank you as always to Max Brandstetter of the Wow Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at max@maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Grace Fooden Correy. Grace has spent over 20 years as a senior executive in the fashion, home, and beauty industries for brands such as Ralph Lauren, Spanx, Victoria's Secret, and Warnaco, which owned swimwear licenses for Michael Kors, Calvin Klein, and Nautica. Grace is also an entrepreneur, launching BioFile Skincare and running the company for 5 years. She's currently an executive consultant to the fashion and beauty industry and an executive coach to African American women in the fashion, beauty, and other industries. Grace, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for doing this. It's great to see you again. I know we connected, maybe a year or 2 ago just to kind of check in, but you're looking well and looking forward to having you share your story with my listeners.
Thanks, Mark.
So we get this show started pretty much the same way every time. I always like to have the guest, talk a little bit about their upbringing. Perhaps there was something in their background that suggested that they would take on the career and develop a career that they have. So tell us your story.
So my story is I was raised in Chicago. My parents are very unique. I had a Jewish father and an African-American mother. At the time they got together, that was unheard of. And they built a housing co-op based on interracial couples in a predominantly white university town, part of the University of Chicago. And so that's where I grew up. I really wanted to do anything that wasn't that. That's really how I got my direction. I wanted to be in business. I didn't want to help people. And I really liked the retail world, and I liked product, and I loved making things. And so all of that led me into the fashion industry.
And where did you start your education?
Well, I started at NYU because that's what they would pay for. And then I moved to Parsons School of Design, where I paid for it myself because they didn't understand, what you do with a fashion degree. My statement to my father was, everyone I know wears clothes, Dad. I think I'll be okay.
Funny. And what was it, do you, as you think back, not to psychoanalyze, but, do you think back as what didn't they understand about what you wanted to do?
My parents were a product of the Depression. And so, they wanted to make sure that we had the very best education. And they thought as interracial children, that was going to be important to us. And they thought that a profession that gives back, teaching, educating, that type of thing were worthy careers, and really didn't think about the world of business at all. I think, as I said, my classic rebel wanted to do what they didn't want me to do, and found my way to the fashion industry.
So you go to Parsons, and while you're there, are you working at the same time?
Oh yeah, I went to Parsons after NYU, and having worked for a few years, I was doing pretty well in retail. I decided after my mother passed away that I wanted to jump on this and get the degree in design, because suddenly I realized life is short. And I went back to school, worked as a senior director at Barney's all 4 years while I was in school, and additional night work on the side, piecework. At that point there were no computer aided design, so like sketching out sweaters and all kinds of crazy things, anything to make a buck. And I continued that all the way through school. And graduating was no different. I mean, the first jobs you get out of school as a new designer, you definitely need another source of income to pay New York rent. So I normally had 2, 3 jobs for the first 3 or 4 years until I got to a level where I could, support myself in New York with just one job.
As far as the brand, let's start with the initial brand. So you come out of Parsons, you mentioned Barney's, and then where?
So I was at Barney's. Again, I continued to work at Barney's even after I got out of school while I had my full-time fashion job, because again, it was supplementing my income. The first company I worked for, I graduated on a Sunday, started on a Monday with a company called Roberta Fryman. She's an independent designer. And on my first day on the job, they gave me a computer. And of course, in school at that point, we didn't have computer-aided design. So I had to have the girl next to me teach me how to use it and get the sweaters designed before the client, who was Bergdorf Goodman, came in later that afternoon. Surprise, surprise, who comes in but somebody from my high school is the buyer. I'm showing the designs and modeling the product, and here's somebody that I know from high school. So it's a small world.
Yeah, you mentioned Barney's, and I can't help but not be brought back to my 13th year on Earth and my bar mitzvah. My parents, took me. We lived in Brooklyn. My parents took me into Manhattan to Barney's to get my bar mitzvah outfit. And to this day, I give my mother. I really give it to my mother because she bought me this outfit that I just couldn't imagine that I was going to wear. It was a tweed jacket. It had suede elbow patches. I was wearing a bow tie. I mean, it was just crazy, but it was from Barney's. So everybody was happy.
So was that at the time when Barney's was still a discounter, or had it already converted to the high-end store it became?
I'm 99% sure that it was no longer a discounter because I remember going, shopping. They had, my dad used to shop in like the Madison room, or they named all the rooms for the suits, for streets in Manhattan. So I'm pretty sure that it wasn't. But anyway, I hadn't thought about Barney's until you just mentioned it for a very long time. You really started as a designer. You spent some time, you eventually got to Victoria's Secret, but you spent some time at Ralph and J. Crew and Gap. How did you navigate your way? I mean, this was relatively early in your career to get yourself poised to work for some, really substantial brands.
I think going to Parsons was the key, because it's so well known and it's a small enough school that people were looking for Parsons graduates. They knew they were ready and knew how to work very hard. It was a grilling process at Parsons at that time. The design class in your sophomore year was a 3-hour class once a week, but they gave you 24 hours of homework every week. So just imagine everyone did an all-nighter the night before that. And, that set us up for what the industry was really like. So, the Parsons connection got me from that first job to, I think next was Emmanuel Ungaro. And then I worked for Ralph Lauren, spent 5 years at J. Crew. From there, I went to the Gap. And here I'm building myself up as a designer, as assistant designer, director, senior director, having a team along in that journey.
When I started my career, I was in finance and then moved to a catalog startup, which was to some degree, this was the late 80s, it was fashioned after J. Crew. It was some people that had been at Crew and now moved and started a business called Tweeds, which was a, brand new catalog business. And, we had one or two designers. And because I knew nothing about fashion, I was always so interested in watching them, sketch things out and how they designed product. It was just so interesting how they could, craft and create brand new silhouettes and fabrications. And, in those days, the tweeds colors where if it wasn't a really strange color name, then it couldn't get into the catalog, and it was all names that, really didn't sound like, the color that it was, Loden and Sky and things like that. But it was really amazing watching the designers. Looking to boost your brand's market share and profitability? Turn to Belardi Wong, the leading full-service marketing strategy and creative services firm. Since 1997, Belardi Wong has been the trusted partner for top brands like Anthropologie, Lulu in Georgia, Johnny Was, and many more. Specializing in the integration of direct mail and digital, we master customer acquisition and retention across all verticals. Belardi Wong delivers results. Discover the difference with Belardi Wong, your go-to for marketing success. Visit Belardi Wong today. You parlay these early roles into now Victoria's Secret. So you go to Victoria's Secret in what capacity?
So I went there as a senior design director. I'd been a senior design director at the Gap before that. Since I had been at Crew, probably year 4 at Crew, they started to try to poach me at Victoria's Secret. I did the swimwear and the underwear and the sleepwear, and that fit right into their model. And they wanted to have a more casual, not always the very sexy things that they were known for. And I went through, at one point at Crew, all the way through the process, flown out on the private jet to Ohio, and didn't take the job because Crew gave me another promotion. And finally, when I was at Gap, I decided to leave the same day Mickey Drexler left. I could see the writing on the wall, like, this is the time to leave this company. And I left with no job. And as I was walking out of the door of the building on 6th Avenue, my phone rang, and it was a flip phone, and it was a headhunter who was saying, so are you ready to go to Victoria's Secret now? And I'm like, can I get out of the building first? Come on, let's just get out the door. And that's how I ended up at at Victoria's Secret.
Right. I talked to a lot of people on this show about their career, and some of them have talked about how they were very prescriptive in navigating their career. They started in a company, they said, well, I don't have global experience, so now I want to go seek global. I have upscale. I don't have anything that's off price. Did you think about your career in totality and kind of how you were going to navigate it? Or did opportunities present themselves and you just went off and did it?
Because I had been a manager for a number of years before I went into the fashion industry, that was an easy move for me. And wanting to get back into the side that was the business side of fashion, the merchandising side of fashion, was really where I saw myself heading. And I particularly focused on those specific categories, although I designed all kinds of things. I started as a sweater designer, and I was doing general sportswear, and then I moved into swimwear and intimate apparel and activewear. I focused on them because I thought that would help me navigate my career. They were slightly less desirable, and so I thought, well, I can get there faster because I have this specific knowledge in these categories.
That's interesting. You mentioned, you used the term merchandising and design. Explain to the listeners the difference between being a designer and being a merchandiser.
A merchandiser is very different than a designer. A designer is the one who actually creates the product. But how much product do you need? How many styles do you need? What depth do these styles need to be purchased in? And this whole architecture of the line is what a merchant does. They're very hand in hand. And so it was the center of the wheel of a lot of these vertical companies during that time was the merchant. And I like to be the center of things. And I knew that I could actually get more control over the design as the merchant than being the designer because of my business background. So that's how I navigated it. And now things have definitely changed. I notice because of the online focus, marketing has become the center of the wheel now. And merchants are still extremely important. But, when you have to design for Amazon versus for your own website and Instagram, it's very different, and it is marketing driven to figure out that matrix. So I think merchandising is kind of taken a turn, and I think that's natural as businesses evolve over time and there are new ways to sell things. But it is an interesting fact that it's happened in my career span.
So the merchandising side is more numeric, more analytical, more measurement than, let's say, a designer role.
Definitely, for sure. But the merchant, he would, in the earlier days of merchandising, have more to say about the aesthetic based on what had worked in the past, and then allowing the designer a certain amount of newness. And so that is all coming from a numeric place, but you had to have an aesthetic eye to know how to pick the winners of what was going to come next. And now, as I say, it's more based on how is it going to be marketed.
It's always been, interesting to me. I've spent most of my career in fashion, and you talk to the designers, you talk to the merchandisers, and you ask them, please array. You got 100 styles, array them high to low, winners to losers, and they can't possibly do that because it's like having 100 children and saying which is your most favored child. As a marketer, and in the old days when we were trying to figure out how many units did you need to buy and how much inventory did you need to have because you knew how much sales you thought you were going to generate, and you would say, all right, this item is a 1.0 is an average. Show me all the ones that are higher than an average. Give me all the ones that are lower than an average. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't come up with the ones that were going to be below average.
Yeah. And I think that is the difference in the way a designer thinks versus a merchant. Force ranking, so important. And I got that because I had this business background before, and I had worked in the marketplace a lot. And so I used that knowledge, and I would merchandise my lines, and my merchants would hardly have to do anything when I was a designer because I kind of already thought that way. It just was automatic. I always put in a little extra so they could say they could throw something out, you know, made them feel good, but they actually appreciated that. And that's why that was a natural progression for me.
So we met at a company called Warnaco, and just doing some, checking in the years that you were at Warnaco was before I got there. Maybe explain to the listeners what Warnaco was, and there was a fairly well-known CEO at Warnaco.
Yes, I wasn't there when she was there. We're talking
Oh,
about
okay.
Linda Bachner, but
Yeah.
I can tell you that when I was in New York and Linda Wagner was in her heyday and the company got into some bad spaces, I would read about it every day in women's wear, and I thought, who on earth would work here? I would never work at that company. Sure enough, 4 years later, I find myself working there. This was like 1999, something like that. And so I came in when Joe Gromack came in as the CEO. And so it was about taking the company out of bankruptcy and getting it to the new place. And I just took it as an opportunity to, one, move to California, two, get to the next level, to a VP level in my career. And I thought, I'll give it a go. But boy, when I got out and saw what was going on, I was a little scared. I thought, is this going to hold together? Is this, it was very in a tender state.
What brands did you work on when you were at Warnaco?
I was hired to launch the Michael Kors swimwear line, and Michael was also in a tender state. He had just come out of bankruptcy. He had just gotten Project Runway, which was a big deal for him to be on TV. And so he was about to go off on a rocket ship of his career. At the same time, I was at this company that was rebuilding itself. There were a lot of funny smoke and mirrors with Warnaco in those early days. Like, they interviewed me in one part of town, but my actual office was in this other really awful part of town. I had no idea where I was going to. The first day I went to work, my heart sunk. And I then found myself colluding the way they did to not show me that part of town. When the Michael Kors people wanted to come and see the office, I was like renting hotel rooms, anything to keep them from seeing where we were actually working. So, it was an interesting experience to be with Michael, who was, and working with him directly on, what was his second shot at things at a company that was, reorganizing itself after a bankruptcy.
So you mentioned the name Joe Gromack. So in our careers, we all have multiple people that were very inspirational in careers, and Joe was one for me. I worked for him at Brooks Brothers, and Joe is a legendary retailer, And so I go to Brooks Brothers, my first general manager opportunity to run the small digital business and their catalog, and worked for them a couple of years. We got sold to a fellow named Claudio Del Vecchio, who wound up owning Brooks Brothers for over 20 years, I think. And then, Joe left that business and, as you mentioned, showed up to take Warnaco out of bankruptcy. And shortly after he got there, he had brought a few other people from Warnaco with him. One of them is Elizabeth Wood, who was running HR. And she calls me and she says, "Well, are you ready to come work here? Joe would like you to be involved in digital." And it's funny, when I left Brooks Brothers and we were talking, somebody said to me, "Geez, would you go work for Joe again?" And I'm like, "I'm not so sure," because he was tough. But anyway, I wound up going to Warnaco and working for him, and it was he was a big part of the success. If I've had any success, a big part of success in my career. So
Yeah, I
good
think he
guy.
was a big part of success in that company, really very gracefully when you look at it in hindsight. It wasn't maybe when your boots were on the ground, but took that company from where it was to sail. I recognize what a challenge that was for someone, and to do it so gracefully.
Yeah. It just proved that, with so many not so nice people in retail or in any, kind of industry, Joe was a nice guy, tough, but a nice guy. And I think you said it well. Yeah, he did it gracefully. Talk a little bit about, you've been in companies that were retail and also had a wholesale component. In your role as a designer or a merchandiser, did that present challenges for you?
All of my jobs were in vertical only up until I went to Warnaco. That was the first company I went to with the wholesale component. I had to learn it boots on the ground. But again, I had worked in retail, so I have some sense of what is going to work in a store, and that's would forever be a part of my thought process. And then from then on, I mostly worked for wholesale. So there was that turning point in my career from always working for vertical operations and then moving into wholesale.
Switch gears. How important is the title of the role that you choose to take on in your thinking? Because you've had a varied array of titles. Is that important?
I really had that climb that I wanted to make. I think as you're starting in a career, you want to climb, and I knew I wanted to get into merchandising, and then I wanted to be, the highest I could be in merchandising, and I achieved that. And then when I had done that for both Warnaco and then Perry Ellis, which also had the stable of brands in swimwear, I started thinking about what kind of company I want to work for. And that was a different thought process. And so then I started to not think about the title so much. I started to think of what's going on at Spanx. That's a really interesting company. Things are happening there. Let me go there. And I started as a consultant there and thought I would just be a consultant, and then ended up staying there because of someone who I'd worked with at Victoria's Secret. So it always goes around to those connections. But again, there was an opportunity in Europe after that. And I thought, well, when else am I going to move to Europe and do this thing? And, so I didn't really think about the title then. I thought, this is an interesting project and it's in Europe. And, it was really fascinating to do that for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's good. The listeners in this show, we have lots of seasoned people like you and I, but I know that we have a bunch of younger people in their career. And, I think when you're starting out in your career, like, you and I did, you want that, constant growth in your title to show that you've, moved up in your path. And sometimes it's just not that important. Also, sometimes that different companies, a director in one company could be consistent with a vice president, in another company.
Yeah, I mean, the idea in Europe of a head of business, I didn't know what that title meant, and I didn't know what that translated to. But gosh, it was a whole lot bigger than anything else I had ever done. I then found out. So, it can be by place or by country, it could be by size of company, all kinds of things.
Element is an award winning advertising agency optimizing e commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, they've helped 13 of their customers get acquired, with one selling for nearly $800 million and one that IPO'd recently. Plus, they were ranked as the 12th fastest growing agency in the world by Adweek. If you're an e-commerce business that needs help scaling your ads profitably, check them out at element.com, spelled ELUMYNT.com. You mentioned Spanx, founder-led brand, yes?
It was founder-led. However, when I was there, she had taken herself out of the business for a number of years. Another really interesting Coca-Cola executive had come in and really driven the growth. While I was there, she left the company and Sarah Blakely started to make her way back into the company. So that was an interesting thing to watch happen. It's sometimes a little gnarly when that's going on, changes in strategies and no, we don't want this division anymore. And, so you kind of go with the flow with that. And that is the nature of being with smaller companies. At that time, it was big, but it was relatively small compared to some of the places I had been. So yeah, watching Sarah take back her company and really, she had chosen to step out and she was choosing to step back in, was really interesting. And she had to reorient herself in that and find out, the first CEO she hired after Lorianne left was not a perfect fit, and you got to move on and you got to, keep moving. That's when I got the call from Germany, and I thought, I don't know how much I want to be a part of this spin, and I can go live in Europe, so why not? But I'm still in touch with that group. She's working on a project now, some possibility I may do some consulting there. So it's still a very good contact.
That's great. So at some point, you get the founder bug, and you get it not in fashion, but you get it in skincare. So talk about Biofile.
So let me tell you how I got there. When I left Europe, I come back to New York and I'm working at Ralph Lauren for the second time, now no longer a junior designer. Now I'm a senior level merchant. And I thought, well, this is great. They had just hired, I can't remember his name, the one who built Old Navy and H&M. He was hired by Ralph Lauren to, take the lead. And I thought this will be an interesting time at this company. He did not last long. He lasted less than 6 months. And then I realized, oh gosh, this company is going to be more of the same. And so I thought this isn't going to be the right place for me because they're not progressive in what they're trying to do. They're kind of stuck in their wheels. They tried to bring someone from the outside in, but they weren't really ready to make the moves that were going to happen by somebody who's really progressive in that way. I met through a mutual friend, a person who was a chemist in the clean beauty industry. I knew very little about it, but listening to her talk about what she was doing, I could tell she was onto something new. And now back at Ralph Lauren, they're not doing something new. Something new sounded really interesting to me. And so I picked up, moved to LA, where I wanted to get back to, and started this company with her.
Oftentimes when people are starting a company, they've identified a void in the market, a problem that's not being solved by other companies. What was that void that you were trying to fill?
This was one of the first true biotech skincare brands. Our products were 90+% made with fermented microbes. So go figure, from fashion to learning about fermenting microbes, that's a stretch. And where do you do that, and how is that controlled, and do you farm them, or do you buy new ones? And it's very complicated, but very interesting. And so I realized it was on the cusp of something new. We were one of the first skincare brands that was branded as microbiome friendly, and that was tested and proven. So these were new terms. Nobody was talking about them at that time, and it also was right before the pandemic. But instead of us struggling into the pandemic, because we were doing something so on the edge, we got a lot of attention. And so we got Forbes and Vogue and all kinds of things coming at us, and retailers wanted to carry us, and we grew to 3 countries within a year and a half. And so that was really pretty intense stuff. And of course I'm biting my nails about the pandemic and when is the bottom going to drop out. But investors showed up. Didn't hurt that I was Black during the time when George Floyd got killed. All kinds of things happened. But then in the end, my partner decided that this life was not for her. And it really wasn't. And I have to respect that. I can't not respect if this isn't going to be right for you. And so I tried selling the company. We had some very high interest, but again, what we were doing was so technically advanced. It was never the money. It was like, oh my God, we don't know if we can do that and get that to happen like that. And, somebody in Europe was very interested. And so in the end, I closed the brand.
Sounds like there were lots of challenges, but you start a business and there's so many things that I guess if you haven't started one before that are surprises or are more difficult than you might have expected. Are there one or two things that stand out for you that were just way more difficult than you thought they would be?
I think the first thing that stood out to me was one, the pandemic happened and I did not know what was going to happen. I replanned the entire business, assuming that we'd be out of business in 6 months. I really did not know that we were going to make it through that. Those economic factors could happen at any time for any number of reasons. And, it could have been the financial crisis of 2007, or it could have been anything. But for us, it was that. We survived that, and that was fortunate. I think raising money as an African American woman, I did not know what that meant. I did not know what a small percentage of the market was looking at me. It's 2% of VC money goes to women in general, and it's 0.02% that go to African American women. And as soon as I heard that, and I was in the middle of fundraising, I thought I must be insane. Like, these odds are stupid. Nobody would take this, right? But in the end, we were able to raise money. I think there's a larger conversation to be had about that, because I think it's obviously that we're not 2% or 0.02% of the population. We have proven that, many women have proven that they can run businesses. So, how is the investment community working with women to, help them succeed?
So that is a good segue into the work that you do as a mentor to women in the African American community. So, do you do that formally or informally? How does that happen for you?
Well, it started in New York, where I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I realized Ralph Lauren wasn't going to be the place to be. There was a planner in the business, an African American woman. I don't have a lot of relationships with African American people because I grew up in white culture in this very special situation that I explained at the beginning. But she said, I'm doing this mentoring program in Harlem, middle school students. Why don't you come one Saturday? And it blew my mind open. I was just like, wow, this is my way into this community. Even though I did not fit in with everyone there, I had at that point 27-inch long blonde hair, very straight, and everybody else was wearing puffy naturals. Not that I didn't wear my hair in natural times when they were wearing their straight, but I didn't fit in completely. But what those kids were getting really moved me. And during the pandemic, all those types of mentoring programs closed down. They restarted in an online version as after the pandemic had eased up, and I was in LA, so I was able to join. And oddly enough, I was talking about this program to a friend while I was going to get my nails done. And the woman I sat next to me was someone who had just started a mentoring program with African American women at USC. And then when I got off the phone, she said, I hear you were talking about mentoring. I want to tell you about something I'm doing. And that also was very transformative. These women at USC, it's a pretty specialized school. It's very wealthy people in general go there. And, one of the women I work with there comes from a background of literally nothing, but came in with a full ride. Well, imagine if she didn't have us to support her. She gets on the plane, she's like dropped in USC land, and, doesn't have a car in LA, doesn't have any sort of resources. So to be able to help that really touched me and was really meaningful to me. And then I started writing about it on LinkedIn because, in addition to what I was doing, this was important to me and I wanted people to know all of me. And that, without any prompting, turned into people from companies in the beauty industry or in the fashion industry reaching out and saying, will you work and mentor someone on my team? We'll hire you as a mentor. And I thought, well, okay, I'll try it. And then one came, and then another one came, and then a lawyer who is independent lawyer, but very young in her career, but very, very good in the beauty industry, came and asked me for some help. And I thought, wow, this is something. This is something these people really want, and it's something that I can do. And it gives me so much pleasure. And it's something I wish I always had.
That's nice. That's great that you're giving back. So just quickly, what are you doing today to occupy your time?
I still love brand architecture in the fashion industry, and I do work with companies on a consulting basis, mostly in merchandising and design. I also work in the beauty industry and mostly with emerging brands and startups. And I mentor African American women at their careers and whatever part they are in their careers.
What a great career you've had. It's really, you've done so much and doing so much good. So congratulations on all that. We're down to the end of the show. We do this 2-minute drill, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are you ready?
I hope so. I don't know
Oh,
if I remember what I was thinking, but we'll go for it.
okay. All right. A brand that you admire or that inspires you.
Skims,
Okay. A favorite app on your phone.
the journal,
Last website other than Amazon that you shopped from.
Home Depot.
Something that you're not good at but wish that you were.
I really wish I was good at Mid-Journey, an AI program where you're working with visuals, and it's on my to-do list.
Okay. Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
The Collected Identity, that's the mentoring program with USC.
Okay. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
I would like to end racism if I could have one superpower.
That would be a good one. Where can people reach out to you on social media if they're interested in chatting?
Sure. On LinkedIn, I am Grace Fooden Correy. On Instagram, I am This is Aging with Grace. Those are the two best places to reach me.
Well, this was a lot of fun. You're looking well. It's nice to catch up with you. Thank you for making the time to share your story with our listeners.
Happy to do so. So good to see you too.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Grace Fooden Correy for coming on the marketing playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, titles do not always matter. As you progress in your career, you do for sure want to show upward mobility in scope of responsibility and your title. Keep in mind, however, that there is much more to a position than the title. A director title in one company can be equal to a VP in another. Focus on the work, the comp, and the company and its values. Those should all be more important than what you have next to your name. Number 2, Grace spoke about being a designer and a merchandiser and how the different roles impact the business. As a merchandiser, you're more involved in the numbers. That said, whether you're a designer or a creative, where the numbers are not a part of your everyday role, do not forego the understanding of the key metrics that drive your business. Make sure you're understanding the P&L and how success is measured. And number 3, do not fear taking the plunge into starting your own company. After many years of working in corporate, we heard Grace speak about her starting the company Biofile. Of course, she had some apprehension, but she had conviction about the void in the market and the product fit, so she gave it a try. You too can start your own company. Just understand that it's hard and you need to find the right people to surround yourself with as both advisors and to have a support system. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.